Well, thank you everybody for coming. Appreciate it. I know it's very, very busy out there as it has been. I don't need to preach to the choir on that. So your time is very valuable, and spending it here for a couple hours with us, whether you were voluntold or you're here on your own accord. Thank you for the dedication to come and talk today about the command philosophy and really our professional development program in general, what we're doing with it this year. So I do want to, however, before we get started, I don't know, Chief, if you've met everybody or at least had the chance to introduce. If you haven't yet.
I tried to.
Sure.
See everybody.
Give it to you. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Dan Haverty. So pleasure to be with you. So I just hope they don't ask any tough questions or geometry or algebra or anything like that. We're good to go.
Yeah, I gave you the manual, so you should be the expert here, and we'll come to you for often. So anyway, Chief, thank you for being here. I know officially you start after the first of the year, and being here to hear what we're doing is great. Having been here in the past and what we're doing now, and some really good stuff. So appreciate your time on that. So let's talk a little bit about an overview generally on the professional development program for this year and what we're doing. So we started off this last year, or this last month, with retirement, getting ready for retirement. Hopefully some of you were able to partake in that. Really good information about deferred comp and how things work moving closer, and really it's never too early to start planning for it so it doesn't jump out at you at the end and you miss some things. So that was a great start off. I will say, before I go too much farther, thank you to Captain Gardner, who is in the training division, getting us together for this year's PDP, but also to wrangle the cats, if you will, to talk about the next 5 presentations. We blew this up for you so you can all see. I can tell, I'm sorry about that. Fortunately, most of it is dynamic and it's discussion. It's not based off of you being able to see this. I'll read it to you if there's something on there that I need you to see for sure. So this is the overview for the next 5 months of what we're going to be talking about, and we're starting over here all the way in December. So we're talking today about the command philosophy. We're going to do an overview of it. I don't expect that you coming in and sitting down here for the next couple of hours with us, that you walk out of here and you know everything there is to know about the command philosophy and its nuts and bolts and ins and outs and how to apply it. That's why the panel is here. So today we're going to do an overview, tip of the iceberg. You're going to start hearing some stuff, maybe reinforcing some things that we've talked about in the last few years of the command philosophy being around, reinforcing some of the references that we have out there, but really getting into the nitty-gritty of how to apply the command philosophy with all of these folks here. Each one of these folks is one of the presenters for the next set of presentations. So in January, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about successful conflict resolution and behavior modification. Chief Peck, Captain Schollard, and Melissa Maddox are going to do that. They're going to come in January, and we'll talk more about some specifics really to get your appetite for coming back in January to talk about it. So after that, January and February, and how the command philosophy gets applied to those things. That's the bigger picture here. The next one in February is going to be focused more on structure fires and how we command those and incident usage of the command philosophy. That's going to be Chief Johnson, Chief Keeley, and Chief Carollo. So that'll be in February. More to come there. March is going to be wildland fires and application of the command philosophy. That's going to be Chief Russell and Captain Henderson, talking about as we get into March, the weather starts changing, being in front of getting ready for wildland season. And also, as I'm sure some of you are here for, the upcoming promotional examinations. We've got the battalion chiefs and captains exam coming up. Anybody here anticipating taking those? Good, good. Uh-oh, there you go. Forced hand raise, that's fine. So I asked that because it's good. It's good stuff to refresh. If it's motivating for you to understand how to use this and that next, it's great. But the other piece is it's just as good that you're here and not going to anticipate doing that, because you'll have a deeper understanding of how to apply this as what in our organization, what we expect you to do when it comes to decisions. So even if you're not going to take the promotional exam, this is a good thing for you to be a part of. And then the last in April, we're going to do all hazards incidents. Captain Pittman, Chief House, and Chief Gonzalez. It's the first time I've got all 3 in one. I had to always get reminded of one of them. We'll be presenting all hazards application, water rescues, EMS, MCIs, hazmats, all that good stuff, and how we use that decision process and it integrates into the bigger picture of the command philosophy. So again, tip of the iceberg today. Not going to we want to try to keep it at a high level. We will get into some kind of things just to kind of get you going and thinking about what this looks like as far as getting down into the weeds a little bit. But the idea is to hit the top, and then you come back and you visit each one of these folks throughout the next few months. However, in the interim, because you have lots of time available probably in your busy schedules, the other piece to this that I want to make sure that we reinforce is this reference. This is the command manual. If you haven't seen it yet, that's okay. But if you have seen it, just remember that everything we're talking about today, all the different parts and pieces of the command philosophy, we'll jump into incident alignment here in a little bit, how those two things relate, that's all in here. There's more depth available in here. As well, you have peers or people that are sitting on this panel that are references for you if you have more questions. I will say that part of the enjoyment, at least for all of us, is interaction. So if you have questions about stuff, please raise your hand. Let's make sure we make that a priority. I know the panel's here as well. I want to be able to make sure that they have time to speak, but they may ask questions and call on you and stuff like that. So get you on the edge of your seat. Hey, Chief Jenkins. So, and then just the last piece before we get into our first group presentation here is making sure that leaving here today, that's where a lot of the work will be done. If you have more questions about it, that's going to be on you guys to start diving in deeper and figuring stuff out. I will say that one of the questions we get or challenges we get to the command philosophy is, command in and of itself references, at least to firefighters in general that are on the emergency scenes, what does command reference typically? I have to do some burpees. It's emergency incidents, right? If you're in command of something, you're running an emergency incident. You're responsible for the emergency incident. In respect to command philosophy, what we want to leave here thinking today is this word is actually defined better as responsibility to make a decision. Okay, so command can be you're responsible to make a decision. So when we talk about whether it's rank specific or it's division specific, the answer is it's not. It's used throughout the organization from the entry-level person all the way up to the most senior person and across the organization. So command is the responsibility to make a decision. What does incident refer to as a firefighter or emergency responder? Don't know? Emergency incident. Yeah, it's an emergency incident, right? In this case, what we're talking about today and usage across the board in the organization, the incident itself is whatever the decision is that you're making, whether it be an actual incident command where you're on an emergency scene, or it's some dealing with a personnel conflict where you need to manage that, or you're managing a program or a project or anything in that regard. So terminology-wise, we had that discussion before, is that we typically would say command is emergencies and incidents are emergencies. Command is responsibility for a decision, which can be an emergency or not. An incident is not just an emergency, it's whatever it is that you're trying to deal with at the time that you're utilizing this decision process. Okay? Any questions on that? Anything I didn't hit or anything you guys want to add? Okay. Let's jump right up. I feel like this is a good time for this so we can get you guys up and about and get some blood pumping, get that coffee in your veins. So we're going to break up into groups. So the group exercise, you can see these pads of paper spread throughout the room. We've got a number of them. They're sticky. They're not smelly pins. I apologize. None of them smell like green apple or black licorice or anything like that. However, they do function well. So what we're going to do, we're going to break up into groups amongst the room. And what we were wanting you to do is to write down, now that you kind of understand what we're talking about today, the general overview of this presentation, write down what do you want to make sure that you get out of today. You may be familiar with the command philosophy. You may not be. This may be brand new. We want you to take some time because when we sit down and we put something like this together, we feel like here are the points that we want to hit, right? But it's got to be consumable or valuable to you all sitting out here in the audience. So we want to make sure that we make it valuable for you. So we're going to take about 10 minutes. We'll break you up into groups, even groups. You guys, I'm not going to have you count off or anything like that. You're all professionals and can figure that out. And go amongst these different easel pads back here, grab a pen, have somebody be the scribe, and write down what you want to make sure that we talk about today. What do you want to make sure we cover today? Okay, any questions? Ready, set, go. Okay, thank you all for doing that. What we're going to do now is we're going to just go around the room and get an opportunity here to present real quick out on what it is that you identified. So let's start over here and we'll just kind of circle around the room. So somebody from this group, maybe somebody that's getting ready to take an exam or something would be able to present something.
So we just, you want me to turn it over and see? So just a clear understanding how to use the command philosophy on incidents, kind of how we use it, why we use it, make sure it's consistent across the board with everybody in the district, that we're all kind of on the same page when we're doing stuff.
Good.
Define what verbiage is expected. Are we always like in a life priority mode? Like what are we in, different types?
Okay.
And then application of the command philosophy outside emergency incidents, besides the EMS calls and fires we go to, how else can we use the command philosophy in different situations you get in if you're a captain or in a leadership position?
Awesome. Thank you. I think we cover all of those pretty well in depth. And I forgot to tell you this too, if as we go through this and hear about what you all want to hear about, at the end we're going to take a look again and make sure we covered it all. But throughout the presentation, if we get into something and there's one of these that apply, then please raise your hand and say this is where we can talk a little bit about that to make sure that we're covering it timely so that you are able to absorb it. But I believe that we're going to cover all of those things in what we're talking about today. So thank you for doing that. Let's go back here.
So for ours, since we are in the Community Risk Reduction Division, how we can apply the command philosophy to when we're dealing with citizen complaints or when we're out just doing everyday inspections as well.
Awesome. We had some of that yesterday when we talked about, we had a couple folks here, one from CRRD and one from EMS, and we talked about those two things specifically. So as we dive into this, let's make sure that we cover those, and I think we will, but yeah. So, okay, let's go on over here. Everybody. Chief Haverty's going to be the one. You guys kidding me?
So the first one that came out was the different perspectives on command philosophy. So we have the Metro way, but is that any different than the city or Folsom or Cosumnes or CDF or any other partners that we go and work with? Are there significant differences any place along the line?
Great.
Define trigger points for incident realignment and different thoughts. What was that? Different thoughts? Philosophy? Is that
Process.
Okay, whatever you say. So the defined trigger points for incident realignment is, the way we kind of talked about it was, here's the norm, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but all of a sudden G presents itself as the highest priority. How do you successfully move it up the ladder so that it gets the greatest attention right now?
Great.
Things dynamic, right? Things change. So how do you do that best?
Great.
And then last, I just asked, do you have any limits of authority as a company officer, as a battalion chief, where are my left and right laterals that I shouldn't, if I get close to that, I better start thinking about making a phone call or something.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a lot to do with, we talk a lot about empowerment and how we got to this point as an organization too. So thank you all for bringing those forward, and let's make sure that we hold us accountable to cover all of them. I think we will. So, okay, so let's move on to the next part of the conversation, which it's related to the command philosophy and the concept. However, there's some question as to how is it related. So we talk about incident alignment, and I think you guys had, incident realignment over here. So what does this bring to an incident? Okay, if you look at this slide also, as we talk about non-emergency usage of the command philosophy and how that works outside, that's one of the things we're going to spend a lot of time talking about here in a few minutes. But when it comes to this, what does incident alignment mean? What does it mean to y'all? If I were to ask you, incident alignment, what is it?
Everyone on the same page.
Okay, on the same page. So how does that, give me an example, or what does that look like for everybody to be on the same page? What is the outcome from that?
That what you expect as a BC is being followed by the captain and being told down to the crew level, to the task level.
Okay.
So, fire attack or what you expect is being done down the line.
Okay, so everybody's aware of each level in that incident alignment hierarchy, if you will, and that it all supports each other where you're aware of or on the same page, so that really what we're looking for is a successful outcome, right? For whatever it is we're dealing with. This is a structure fire specific, emergency scene specific example of incident alignment, right? So if we think of this like a stack of blocks or a totem pole or something like that, if we are out of alignment, or if we remove one part of that structure, what happens to the structure? The stack of blocks, what happens? Falls over, right? What does that mean on an emergency scene? If the incident is not aligned and it falls over because we're not all on the same page, what does that look like? Maybe an example.
Injury. Extension. Yeah,
it gets worse, right? So it could mean somebody loses their life on the far end of the spectrum, which is not a good thing, right? So if we have, or they're in an area where they're taking more risk than what the reward might be, and something does happen to them where they get hurt or something like that. So in this example, if we are in an incident stabilization priority, a defensive strategy, because there's a 1,200 square foot house that's on fire from all the way around, there's no survivable spaces. Our tactics are fire attack and exposure control or protection, and somebody does a VEIS on the structure. Is that an aligned incident? What is happening at that point?
Out of alignment.
Out of alignment. So it's potentially, what it is doing is it's lessening our probability of a successful incident mitigation, right? It doesn't necessarily mean something bad is going to happen, but it means we are more probable to not have it go well. Agreed? Right? So it's not if then. If it's in alignment, if it's out of alignment, it will be bad. It increases the potential, right? So successfully aligning an incident looks like we are able to have a safely and effectively and efficiently mitigated incident with a good outcome, where we didn't create more damage to something, we didn't cause injury, none of our folks are hurt, the public isn't negatively impacted. So that is what that looks like. The concept of the incident alignment and the relation it has to this, the command philosophy, is that to maintain incident alignment, to make good decisions on where we're at, depending on whatever level you are in there, you use this to make a decision to help it to stay in alignment, okay? So incident alignment, depending on how high in that you're deciding to interact with it, you use this process to keep it in alignment. So I'm going to reference this a few times today. The relationship between incident alignment and command philosophy is talked about in this book. It's on page 9 and 10. So it's in there for more information and more depth about it. Again, I talked about the tip of the iceberg. There's some more good examples and communication about that in this document. So make sure that you're reaching out and taking a look at that as well. Did I miss anything on that panel? Everybody happy?
I think we can maybe address this one here. They use trigger points for incident realignment, right? So commonly, what do we have on a structure fire? Usually it's something where we've been getting good at saying, we're now in incident stabilization, right? So usually that's after like a primary has been cleared or completed, right? So then we do that, and we usually make some form of announcement over the radio so that we can realign our incident, right? And realign the risk we're going to take. So when we look at over here, Brian, did you spell this?
Oh yeah.
You went to Cal, didn't you?
I went to college.
Cal Berkeley or like?
We'll just say Cal.
Well,
He was an
yeah.
athlete, though. Not an athlete. Hey, wait a minute.
But the whole point is that we do have this realignment, right? That when we take a look back and we say, well, why do we got to say we're in incident stabilization now, right? That's the intent behind that, is to realign our incident so that we're not taking unnecessary risks. Because that's what I think of is when we start getting out of alignment, we start putting ourselves at risk when it's not necessary at times. Okay, so we have some of this already built in. Is it the same for everybody? No. Can we get better at that as an organization? Yes. But that's where training and conversations and things like that have to happen.
Thanks, Russ. And I think and we'll talk about this more as we get down, the fact of this being an ongoing process and reevaluation is the key. One of the triggers, if you will, or decision points is when we recognize that we're not in alignment, the process is built in to be circular. It's cyclical. It's not just linear. You don't just go to the end and we're all good, done deal. So we keep doing this until we get a successful outcome or whatever that end of that decision-making process is. So, okay, let's now talk about, that was a lot of emergency scene stuff, right? We said we want to use this across the organization. Expectation is for people to make decisions. We want to give you the left and right bumpers, as we talked about earlier. However, we recognized that when this went to print and it was the concept came about, these two concepts came about and we went to print, that a lot of the feedback we got is that's very emergency scene based. Fair enough. So we talk about continuous improvement as part of the Metro way and being adaptable. We need to go back and we need to look at, okay, we took a swipe at it, we did good, we changed some things, we built some consistency. What do we need to do better now moving forward? So, incident alignment for HR or personnel conflict or what that looks like. A group of folks that got together, i.e. the folks that are doing the presentation next month, Chief Peck, Captain Schollard, Captain Gardner, Captain Beard, am I missing anybody? Huh? Melissa Maddox, are doing that next month. They sat down last week and we said, here's incident alignment. I'll tell you this card. The way this is written is exactly the same as it was written when it was first brought to a concept and moved forward, right? So knowing that that's happened 6 years ago, we needed to make some changes. So this group got together the other day, sat down and said, how do we do a better job of being able to apply this process outside of the emergency scene and make it understandable so that we can use it outside of those emergency incidents. We can use it to how do we deal with citizen complaints. We can use it for how does it apply to inspections, right? So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Peck and to Captain Gardner to talk about that process because this part here is where we need some feedback. We're starting it right now. This is first edition. The goal is second edition and incorporating some of these other things. So you want to start us off, Chief Peck, about
So like
how
Chief
that
Mitchell said, next month I'll be one of the presenters when it comes to conflict resolution, okay? And you'd probably agree that when it comes to the command philosophy in the previous slide, it's a little easier to take the fire ground and apply it to that, a little more difficult to do it with conflict resolution. Would you agree with that? A little harder?
life priority in an HR conflict.
So if you can only make one PDP, then you should come to January's conflict resolution. Just to
This is
let
the
you know.
sales.
Okay, that's the selling point. So next month we're going to do that. We don't talk a lot about conflict resolution personnel issues. It's something the agency we're trying to do more of. It's a little harder because there's a lot of confidential issues. There's a lot of things we don't hear about. But one thing I hear from everyone who's preparing for an exam or who is the supervisor, boy, I don't even know where to start, where to go with this. So we're trying to create somewhat of a template or an incident alignment with HR issues or conflict resolution. Would you agree that a conflict is an incident? It is, correct? So this is kind of a work in progress, and we really want your feedback, honest feedback. And you can talk about it now. You can send myself or Captain Gardner an email. We created this alignment slide for HR issues, which kind of mimics the fire ground. You have your priority, your strategy, your tactics, and tasks. But we came up with some different words because we thought it'd be a little confusing. For example, on strategy, how would you do an offensive conflict resolution? That sounds a little confusing, right? So we picked some different words right there. And your priority, you have immediate or delayed. Do I have to make an immediate decision, or can I wait on this? Can I slow down? Strategy, elevate. Do I elevate it up the chain of command? Can I handle it at my level? Tactics, how am I going to mitigate that? Do I need to do more exploring or research? And then finally, the tasks, mentoring, value-based discussions, documenting, which could be a counseling memo. So what we'd really like to do in January is for you to leave, whether you're a promotional exam, whether you're a supervisor, or this could be peer-to-peer. We'd like you to walk away with something like this. So when you do have a conflict, you kind of have something to look at to kind of keep you in alignment. Every conflict, we can use that command philosophy. We can apply that command philosophy to every conflict, but that's going to help keep us in alignment, no different than the fire ground. So right now, just off the top of your head, is there anything when you look at that doesn't make sense, you're not going to hurt anybody's feelings here because we really want some buy-in. Anything that doesn't make sense or anything you add or delete?
I think it makes sense, but I would also add kind of like seeing, if everybody remembers the movie Bobby Fischer, great chess player, and when he was getting mentored, one of his mentors said, don't move until you see it. Like, don't move until you see it. I would add that above the priority. It's like, before, if it's not immediate and it's a delayed issue, before you engage, understand what the competing issues are. And I'll take it back from one of the things I learned from Scotty McKinney. I asked him when I was studying this, what's the first thing you do? He said, the first thing I do before I check emails and all that stuff, I see how my people come to work. And I said, why? He says, nothing I want to get done is going to be done without their help. And if I ignore how they come here, I'm ignoring a great resource that I need to get stuff done. And I always remember that. So I would just add kind of like, what are the competing issues going on? And one thing I've learned is it a skill or a will thing? Whatever I'm dealing with, is it you willfully want to do this? Or is this a skill, training, you got the wrong information or whatever, before you engage in the problem? We do the same thing we do with size up on the structure fire. We do the exact same thing.
Would it be fair enough to say that what you're talking about could be encompassed with essay, complexity, risk assessment?
I agree. I just wouldn't use those words because we stay stuck in the fireman type. What are the people factors going on? What are the human factors going on with this individual? Society, climate, what could be contributing to the way this person saw whatever happened or the way they showed it? And the takeaway would be, like the end goal of mitigating any incident, I would think in any personnel incident, one, protect the district, two, make this person feel like they're valued. No matter what happened, at the end of the day, we value you, we're a healthy part of the organization, and we want the same thing in some regards. And I think that's kind of like what we do on command philosophy on structure. We want to mitigate. We don't want to make it worse. At the end of the day, they lost their home. We take care of them over at Cross. What can we do to help you? How can we show you we value you as a member of our society and community, irregardless of whatever happened?
Okay, good points. Anybody else?
Desired outcomes.
Desired outcomes? Okay.
So as I approach any personnel conflict, the more I study, the more I read, the more I look at our Bill of Rights, and the more I talk with battalion chiefs how they mitigate incidents within the station. One of the first things that I've learned as of recent is, what do I want to happen from this? What is the desired outcome? Almost like in an incident, we want to mitigate the incident, put the fire out. Well, how am I going to put this fire out? Is it going to be a disband of the station? Everybody's going to go their separate way? Is it going to be a closed door session where they all talk and they're able to resolve their own issues internally? What is the desired outcome?
Okay.
And how can I provide an environment that can have that desired outcome?
Anybody else? Captain, go ahead.
I guess how it's going to be supported from level to level. So if a company officer has an incident and they decide to handle it their level and feel like it doesn't need to go further, but then once the information gets passed along and a BC comes down and says, oh no, this is getting moved up, it kind of feels like it could create some tension and conflict there and not trusting the judgment of the company officer per se.
So something that maybe gets out of the box, and now you have competing interests in terms of how it should be handled at different ranks. Okay.
I'm going to chime in on that one.
Yes.
So Chief Johnson, not to put him on the spot, we had a discussion today. So you guys are going to deal with conflict resolution of stuff you probably have never dealt with before, and how do you deal with it? So part of where I'm going to run to is we talk about priority, immediate, delayed. If we ran into an issue, I'll be vague. To me, it was an immediate issue that needed to be addressed. Go down to the next one, to strategy, elevate or handle at your level. Should never have come to my level at all. Now, with that being said, I had to take action and involve, but I also rubbed some fingers with Chief Johnson. So part of his follow-up today was to come have a conversation with me that we needed to talk, and that's good. That's part of that going back through your circle and coming back around so you can handle it. So I think after our discussion of what we had, this should have been, literally the individual should have been handled by the captain. BC found out awareness when I found out awareness, but you see where I have to come into the issue. It had to be handled, but where was that role in the fire station? So what I kind of come back to in this risk assessment, mentor, educate, document, and notify, there's still work going on Mike and my level, Mike's got a lot of work just in his level, just dealing with that and follow up. And some of this is in a process that's gonna go probably weeks or months or mentoring. And part of it is me sharing some of these examples with you guys. Nothing more, and I can guarantee from Chief Mitchell's standpoint and mine, we want you to handle that at the company level. We want captains to be captains. We want employees to be employees and be responsible, right? Doesn't mean you can do things in the fire station or nobody's gonna check you or where you're at, but what we want is you guys to know what the roles are, know what the risks are, and handle that. If they don't, and it gets to my level, now I gotta get involved. And now Mike, I love the relationship there that he can come and say, hey Chief, I got an issue on what he perceived maybe how I handle it. And I give him some more information, whether, I think we understand each other. I think we have an agreement, but we understand each other, where now he understands me, I understand him, and now we're moving forward on how we're gonna handle more of these in the future. Does that make sense? But now he can help deliver that message. It really comes down to the employee that should have been handling that position. Hopefully that adds some context. So what I would throw back to, Katie mentioned there too, part of in the fire service with what we deal with is trying not to get, as we say, butthurt on personnel issues or where they're at. We want to bring the best product to the public, best product to the work environment. We should have a great work environment and how we feel and where we stand, but we've got to have those tough conversations. I know Tony, when he brings up conflict, it's what we deal with all the time. And I could say just in understanding my wheelhouse, that's all I deal with all the time is typically conflict, problems, issues. Usually people don't call and say, hey Chief, how are you? How's today? Because you always hear me talk about skiing and how's your kids and all that. That's what I really care about. But you do have to address that conflict resolution.
So, great discussion, and a lot of this is, when you talk about how do you identify a training need or a training gap, this is a huge one, right? We talk about being comfortable with this in an emergency situation, but the fact that we're bringing this up now and it's creating this discussion, to me, has that tone of we have a training gap and we need to do it. Do we do a great job of providing leadership training and how to deal with conflict resolution and those types of things in the organization right now? I see some heads kind of like, is he asking me maybe if no, we don't. We don't do a good job. So as a training gap or a focus, we as the organization need to make that a priority. When we talk about these things, most of the time when I hear them come up is, how do I deal with this conflict? It's not, how do I put that fire out? How do I run that medical call? How do we deal with the stuff that Chief Jenkins is talking about that takes up 90% of his time? How do we be the leaders that we need to be? How do we watch our people to get situational awareness about their status walking in the fire station? Because is there a decision being made when you mentioned Scotty looking at that? Is he making a decision? Our goal is to use this process of what the decision is. What is my day going to look like? I need to know what my people are or how they're coming in the door. What's the complexity mean? Is the ops calendar got competing things on it? Do we have a bunch of stuff we need to get done today? Do we have a probationary item that we need to deal with? What's my risk? If Joe is not feeling good today and we go out and do something, is he going to do something or say something to somebody that's going to create more problems or whatever that looks like? My decision points, and so you get it. We're going to keep going down that. That's a decision that's being made to deal with an everyday situation in the fire station that we want to be able to reflect back on this. That's where we go with it. But I will tell you that as an organization, we need to do a better job of bringing leadership, training, and principles into the organization, to you all to be able to bring some value there. So,
to your point, Chief Peck, one thing I would add is, how are the societal things influencing our human dynamic at work? One huge one you use is COVID. Something as simple as masks, not wearing a mask, this and this and that. From a leadership standpoint, understanding how to address that with your people, like, look, you might have personal values on this, but this gets all the way extrapolated to people getting mandatory because people go home sick because they come to work, and being able to deal with that on a human level to see what are the competing issues when somebody comes into work and goes, I don't want to do this, versus it's a policy, we have to do this, and how do you navigate that with the command philosophy of how do we have this conversation? Where when you walk away, you understand I value you, and I also value the organization, and this is what we have to do, but not ignore, I understand you have valid points of why you might not want to do it, and I'm going to hear you, and I'm going to show value to it. Because I notice we deal with those things, and they hit us, and we're not ready, and then we go, whoa, what happened? And then it extrapolates to a whole lot of other things that I think if we were addressing it at a level of how do you deal with people, how do you deal with this, it would lessen a lot of that pushback, blowback, all those things.
And so those are good points, and there's no right or wrong here. This is why we want to hear from you. And Chief Johnson's going to talk about essay here. Essay is huge. Essay is not just our daily essay, it's historical, it's what happened over the years. So for me, when we talk about the command philosophy, basically helping us stay in alignment, to me that essay is really huge on the human factor, taking all of that in. So that's already there, what you'll hope with the complexity and the risk assessment. Now it's time to make decisions, or decision points. I'm going to decide that this is priority. I'm going to decide this is the strategy I'm going to take. Those are the tactics I'm going to take. Those are the tasks I'm going to take. And actually a subset of the tasks goes right into what you said. Okay, I'm going to do a value-based decision or I'm going to mentor. Well, depending on that person, depending on their history, depending on how they tick, will depend on how I'm going to talk to them or try to relate to them. So I think that essay really builds, that's going to be tons of information. Once you get all that, time to make decisions. Here's how we're going to make decisions, stay in alignment. And then each individual is different on how we're going to go about doing that. That's kind of my mindset. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's good info and some good information from Captain Oaks too as well.
And I think to that point, Tony, is that this is not intended to be black and white, like very clear. The idea is it's a framework to empower people to make decisions. We're not going to get it right 100% of the time. We're human. We got to be okay with that. We got to have enough humility to admit, yeah, we could have done better there, right? But this is a framework to use some of those, you mentioned the value-based, what that looks like. We'll talk about that here in a minute, to get to the end point, whatever that happens to be. Whether it's managing my station, dealing with a citizen complaint, putting out a fire, doing a medical aid, dealing with wall time, those types of things. So we'll keep moving, but this great discussion.
Gardner might have had.
No, you guys are hitting it all.
So if you want, you can send myself or Captain Gardner an email. Feel free. If you don't feel comfortable here, we'd really like to hear from you because like we said, we really want you to walk away in January with a really solid understanding and something you can kind of go away with, whether it's a promotional exam or everyday life.
Cool. Okay, we'll keep moving because I definitely want to make sure we dive deeper into this process and hit all these steps as getting the panel more involved. So the command philosophy. I think it's important to remember that what I mentioned before is this is an empowering tool that not all organizations can say they believe in. Large organizations, small, what have you. Not everything. There are many places that are very scripted on how you deal with whatever it is. In the emergency services, as a fire district, as Metro Fire, we want to make sure we are empowering you to make decisions. And to do that, we need a consistent decision process that you can utilize with some bumpers to deal with those situations that we don't have all the factors on or be able to provide to you the exact steps to deal with because that's not the world we live in. Is every medical aid the same? Is every house fire the same? Is every personnel issue the same? No. You need to be able to take all of the information from whatever that decision is that you're looking at, whatever it's your crew or what have you, and be able to go through a process to come out with the output and a decision. That's what this is. It's a framework to empower you to make decisions. Okay? If I were to say, just as an example, just because we talk about people's experience and things like this, if I were to say, I want you to picture a house fire where the alpha side is well involved. Okay, got it? The point is if I were to go in and have you each draw what that looks like and all the factors you just considered, there would be 25, 30 different house fires, right? So even just saying something simple like something that we do regularly, which is deal with house fires, every single one of them are different. We have to be able to have a framework to make decisions to empower you so that you don't have to ask, please can I, on all of those types of situations. Can you imagine as an organization if we had an ambulance that shows up on scene at a house fire and there was a person that's hanging out of a window where they can do a VEIS, those individuals on that unit would have to call and ask for permission before they took action? How bad that would be, right? Put that in and we want that to apply to all the decisions here. This is a very exciting philosophy for an organization to have. It's really, really, it's a good thing for us to be in. The outcomes will be much more positive and can have a better chance of success because you're empowered to do that. Are we going to get it wrong? Sometimes. Is that okay? Yes. If we deal with the situation differently than someone else, Captain Fulcher deals with something a certain way, and then somebody else comes along and Captain Cahill deals with it differently, is that okay? If they followed the process and they utilized those bumpers we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, then the answer is yes. It's okay to be different. All of our incident complexities, one of the factors there can be driven by what our experiences are. Are all of our experiences different? Okay, and we use this often as a first day supervisor, different with their experience level on how to deal with certain situations. We use a citizen complaint than somebody that's been doing it for 10 years. Is an incident going to be complex to the first day supervisor, a highly complex incident, versus a 10-year person that say, oh, we got that. I've dealt with that 18 times. All right? So just remember, all of those factors weigh into this and allow it to flex up and down and go throughout the whole situation, the whole process. I don't expect for you to walk out of here today understanding every piece of this from front to back. And it needs to be made clear that when we're dealing with time compression as a factor, if there is something that we talk about with when we talk about the HR piece, and this is an immediate priority, two people are wailing on each other in the fire station, or in this regard, there's a fire right now that's going on, but the expectation is not that you're going down all of these steps of the process because you have time compression, right? So how do we deal with that? We're not going to sit in the cab and go, what's my situational awareness? Or sit in the office and say all these things because we have a time compression. That's not the idea. We deal with it by, number one, we train on it. So we talk about it as a framework and an organizational expectation. Then in the mindset of when we're dealing with a time compressed situation, we're doing this subconsciously already. Are we using this when we are going on a medical aid right now? Are we making decisions right now as an organization? Absolutely we are. Are we dealing with citizen complaints and going through and making decisions on how we do? Absolutely we are. We're already doing this. One of the words that was used earlier is common sense. This is just a way for us to train to it, right? Can you reference this and say this is why I made my decision? That's the important piece. And then the other side of that is once we make a decision, we can do an after action. We can look at how we made the decision and go back and go through each one of these steps and say, yeah, was that a good decision? Yeah, we did this, we missed that. Here's an idea where we need to reinforce so we can go deeper into this area. Did you think about these things? So it brings value that way too, for the time compression piece of a decision. Now, is there a time where it might be valuable to go down and use this to go through each step? What's an example of that? More burpees? What's an example of some time when you might be able to do that? If you want to go, I want to do a really good job and make sure I hit all these points when making a decision.
Lack of familiarity with the decision that you need to make, whether you're in charge of a new project and we're trying to figure out where our boundaries are and things like that. So I might reach out to somebody in finance to figure out how's this budget process work for this, or even around the station, right? You new to the firehouse and you want to make some changes to the gym, right? You might go through this process a little bit more in depth than you would say on a short setback, single story, 1,500 square foot house fire where it's just more of a reaction instead of a process you're going through.
Yeah, so there's a time factor and a familiarity factor there, right? I think those are the two keys. If you're not in time compression where you can go through and say, am I doing this and I'm doing a good job to the organizational expectation, it's a huge thing. Or if you're not familiar with it. If I've got a finance issue, budgets typically aren't time compressed, hopefully. We want to be way out in front of those. It takes many months, right? If we're going through and doing a budget, it might be where we go through each step of this process very, very diligently and in depth, okay? So there are different times and different uses for this process as well to make a decision, okay? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the history of how we got here. So Metro Fire formed on December 1st of 2000, 16 predecessor fire agencies come together to form Metro Fire, right? So we came into the organization, some of us got here right as that happened, some of us were here as it happened. A couple of them were in here this time. Usually they're not, but that's good. If you look back in time and some of the common things that were said amongst the district or the organization over our early years is we are inconsistent. We had 6 battalions, 3 shifts. Some would say at times we have 18 different fire departments, right? Whether it be on the emergency scene or elsewhere in dealing with decisions, it was very all over the place, depending on what your roots were and where you came from. We also had many examples throughout our history of emergency incidents that didn't go so well, or maybe were close calls or things that challenged us to go, whew, man, we just barely missed on that one. Some of those examples, I use one of them that comes to mind is the 65th Street and how that all went down and what that looked like for command and control. So there was some differences in how we did things, really not a consistent process to get there. And so back in 2016, the decision was made to, hey, let's write something down so we can have a consistent process to train to, so that we can start making those decisions better and become more consistent across the organization, whether it relates, at the time, it was very focused on the emergency scene or incident management. So that's where we got to, let's write this thing down, the command philosophy, let's write this down. And we use looking at different either best practices, NFPA standards, some of the military inputs with like the OODA loop or recognition prime decision making, the planning process on large scale incidents, all across the board, and there's probably some that I'm not even thinking about or that didn't come up but or would be applicable. And we came up with this process of here is a framework that we can use to start training to and having discussions as an organization. So having that, and Chief Bridge was the operations chief at the time. We started PDP around that time also. One of the earliest presentations was about this, command philosophy and what it was. It was very new, 2016-ish, maybe 17, somewhere in there, 6-7 years ago. And that's where it started. So we wanted to have the process, again, that goes back to a consistent decision process that can be trained to, utilize in making decisions, and to review the decisions after the fact for improvement, like we just talked about. Okay? So that's where we started. And then we started having more discussions about this card is great, this principle or these philosophies are great, but where's the depth, right? So that's when we started integrating this document. We started this project. This was, hey, let's take the command philosophy, let's take incident alignment, and let's write it down. Let's add some depth to describe and dive into detail about what that looks like as an organization so that people can reference it. It doesn't have any names associated with it. It's attached to the organization. It's best practice for what we do. That happened a couple of years, and then in 2020, we went to print. We sent it off to an editor out in Minnesota, worked with them. They made it look professional and made it sound and smooth and go together smoothly. And then we, through that editor, the partnership was built so that it became published by Amazon. Because it was we weren't going to make any profit on it, never is, hasn't been, or it will be our intention to make profit on this. It is really about just having an organizational document that people can review. They charged enough for the document to cover the editing and for the production, and that's it. So that's where that came from, and now it's available out there, first edition, on Amazon to be able to order it. We bought a whole bunch of them, put them in fire stations. They're at training for extras if you want to buy them. You can buy your own personal copy if you'd like. Some folks outside of the organization have also purchased it, but that's where we got to get here. Where are we at today? We talked about the need to expand our horizons and get outside of this cool fire thing on the front here and talk more about organizationally accepting that this is a process we want to use across the board for non-emergencies also. So that's where our Chief Peck, as that chair of the revision committee, we'll be working on with a group of folks over the next year, the second edition, to do a better job of exactly what we're looking for input on. So if you're interested in that, make sure you get a hold of him and you can work with that group to make it better. We talk about continuous improvement on the Metro Way. That's what we need to do. It's our document. It's a living document. It needs to reflect best practices, and so we need to do a better job in that regard. Fair enough? Any questions on that? My mouth's getting dry, so I know I've been talking for a while, so I'll try to get through here. Okay, we talked about value-based decision-making. There's not a policy or a procedure or working in an organization that tells you how to do everything from A to Z that sounds fun to work for. Okay, so what does value-based decision-making mean?
Exactly what you said. There's not a policy for everything, so here's our set of values that we believe in as Metro Fire. So we have our core values, we also have the Metro Way, and so when something comes to you, as it always does, that's outside of our normal operations or outside of a policy or procedure, how are you expected to make a decision? Use these as your guiding light, and if you're within these and you have service delivery as your first thing and it's in our core values, then your decision making is going to be backed up by the people above you, as long as you can justify by, I use these core values, I use service delivery as my number one thing, you know, and I'm coming to you because we're in a high trust state and I'm telling you about this now, you know, then we can make those decisions.
Awesome. Thanks, Duper. Well said. Are those all, those things are written down, right? You mentioned values. We have a mission, a vision, and a core value set. We have the Metro Way and those 6 pillars of what the Metro Way looks like. So those are some of your bumpers on how we describe where you need to be at when you're dealing with things that we don't have a policy or procedure or protocol to deal with. Those are your bumpers. If I have a decision in front of me and I'm utilizing these resources to make it, that's what we're asking for. That's what we're looking for. Because we don't want to work for an organization that tells us everything and every way to do exactly what we're supposed to do, right? I mean, here's how you clean a toilet. This is what we expect you to do with mopping. We don't want to work for that organization. None of us do. So those value-based decisions have some bumpers already written down. Now, are there some things that are also written down that tell us exactly what to do? Absolutely. There's laws, there's policies, there's protocols for EMS. So some of those are pretty well scripted and dictated. We are not saying that you can go against those things by using this, generally speaking. But we also need to give you tools to be able to make decisions when you're dealing with something that's not specifically dictated throughout those processes. Okay? Good? Okay, and again, it comes back to being empowered, which is great. That's where we want to be as an organization. We talked a lot about this already. Time compression, not all decisions are time sensitive, so use your resources. If you're dealing with an HR issue and you've never dealt with it before, phone a friend. Call your next level in your chain of command, reach out to the folks that deal with it all the time in HR and get those resources. This is where this comes into play. We talk about ensure appropriate resources are requested. That's where that comes in. We got people that deal with stuff that know it. Sometimes it involves other things like attorneys or things like that. We have those to be able to help us and guide us, but that's where that comes into play. Use your resources, especially on the non-emergency side. So. Anything I missed? Anybody? Good? Okay, let's move on to where you get some interaction and get the panel involved. I appreciate your patience on that. So there's 3 questions up here. I want you to take about 3 to 5 minutes to answer these 3 questions from your own perspective. The first one is, can you describe situational awareness? Second question is, what does risk assessment mean to you? And third, what is the difference between management and control objectives? All right, so thank you for answering those questions. So what this looks like now is each one of the panel members here is going to start the conversation off as we work through the different parts of this, the command philosophy. So we're going to start at the top, we're going to go through it step by step, and we're going to talk about some specifics from their perspectives, but also from what you all wrote down on those 3 different questions. And get your input on that and to have a little bit more discussion to bring understanding to it. But again, just remember that the depth is going to come, and I'm sure they'll sell each of their wares appropriately for their month from coming back and then walking away from here and doing more with it. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it over. Chief Johnson, you want to talk about how do you describe situational awareness as it relates to your area of presentation?
Yeah, so this is the first shameless plug for the February PDP. We'll be talking about house fire, structure fires. It's going to be the best one, so please clear your calendars and come out for that. We will get into a lot more situational awareness, what it means on the fire ground during that. But for today's, we'll just kind of generally talk about situational awareness as it pertains to the command philosophy itself. So does anybody want to give some of their answers that they put down for describing situational awareness?
I put the ability to take the full picture in and understand outside influences that can impact that incident.
I like it. Will you expand on some of those outside influences? Because I think there's...
Not getting into structural, but taking that as an example, hey, we have that structure fire, but are you taking the full picture in? Is that gonna extend somewhere? Do we have power lines? That's taking the full situational awareness, and also what kind of resources do I have coming and do I need more?
Okay. Anybody else?
Outside of the structural component, I would say figuring out all the information in the situation, the intel around it, all the possible outcomes, stakeholders. So let's just say you take a non-fire scenario where, say there's a complaint, figuring out who it was, where, how big can it go, what happened, could this involve, could this be on the news? Do our PIO need to be involved? How far could this go? Understanding that what may happen on one level, the situational awareness on a different level is much, much different, how far it can go. So just understanding all those components and how, almost ask yourself, how bad could this get? And if it does get this bad, what do I need to do in order to mitigate this and follow up and, you know, kind of contain it, risk management, kind of contain it.
Good.
So I've got, because I think you can use this on anything, is situational awareness is the difference between what you perceive is going on around you and what is actually going on around you. So the better your situational awareness is, the more you perceive what is going on is what's actually going on. So the more information you get, the better situational awareness you have.
I like it. So I wrote down something simple, the ability to know and understand what's going on around you, right? So the idea is that we all come with some sort of blinders on, right? It's human nature to have some sort of blinders. And how do we remove those blinders enough to see the bigger picture, the totality of what's going on? In the earlier class, we talked about what some of those blinders could be. On the fireground scenario or not, a lot of it can be experience driven, right? We could see the exact same thing, but if somebody has experience, they can identify something that's pertinent to that incident, or somebody that may be newer in their career hasn't experienced that yet, it doesn't resonate with them, right? So they know what they see, but they don't understand it, right? And then when we talk about, and Rashawn's done a good job about talking about this situational awareness and some of the people problems or the conflict things, is some of those biases that come in, right? Like, what kind of baggage am I carrying into this? Recognizing that. Say, you know what, I got to recognize this. This is part of my essay to say, I got to remove this from the scenario for me to be an impartial person in this conflict resolution. So it's taking yourself up, trying to take your blinders off, and being, having that holistic, mindful approach to it, right? There is one operational question here that I will throw out at you guys, and it is this. So the best way on a fire, right, that the incident commander is probably going to request a 360 to get their situational awareness, right? What is it that you guys think the IC wants to hear from your 360 report?
Hazards, exposure issues, location, extent of the fire. That's kind of what comes to mind off the top of my head.
Awesome. The first thing is that we want to hear back from you, right? If you pay attention to radar traffic, there's a lot of 360s assigned and a lack of follow through on, here's what I found on the 360. But as we've talked about, those are all good things. The 3 L's is what we've kind of been talking about up north in the battalion for some time. Life, right? Whether that's the life that you find of civilians when you do the 360 or something that's going to affect one of the firefighters' life, some sort of a hazard like you spoke about. The layout of the building, what are we missing, right? We can only see the building out of perspective from whatever side we're parked. We're sending the person to do the 360 for another perspective. What's the layout? Is there a walkout basement? Is it multi-story, whatever? And then what's the location of the fire? And what is the fire doing? And we communicate that pretty much through a CAN report, right? Not forgetting the needs portion of it. You're really in a position at that point having that elevated level of situational awareness to kind of make some play calls, is to say, hey, this was actually an outside-in fire off the Charlie side. I need a hose line back here, and we'll establish fire attack on the Charlie side, but I need a hose line moving forward, right? So identifying, communicating, and then falling back with those needs.
Okay, go ahead.
Another important part of a 360 is getting a roof report from the truck company. Knowing what's going on the roof is just as important as getting intel from the 360. If it's running the attic, HVAC units, or roof collapse, the truck company's gonna have the best view of that to give intel back to command and the interior crews. So captains, don't forget to ask, even if you hear at 360, ask a truck captain for a roof report.
And the truck team's working on that right now to help outline expectations organizationally and what that looks like moving forward. So that's some good stuff that's happening. So I will say situational awareness, you can do an entire class on that, and it could take us weeks and weeks of assignments and reading and things like that. But again, I think shameless plugs are important. This book right here, pages 12 to 19, goes in depth about situational awareness. So this is one of those references that you can look at and go into further because, again, we're at the tip of the iceberg here that talks more about it. Now, there's also plentiful other options out there. You put situational awareness into Google, and you're going to get some information. So, and how that applies outside, again, we went to Chief Johnson for his area and his plug, but we can apply that to a personnel conflict, or what is it with your situational awareness as you're dealing with inspections and things like that? Is this a problem building we've dealt with before? Is it a reinspection? What's my relationship with this builder or this person asking? So we can use it across the board for all those different things, and that's important to recognize. So anything else on that?
The other thing, and it sort of ties into what Rashawn was talking about earlier, is SA around the firehouse or around the office, right? You know, you see somebody that's sort of distancing themselves from the crew, or you know, they're not coming into work, or they're consistently late, or what's happening there? What can we recognize if we have our blinders on, right? And we don't put two and two together, that every time I walk in a room, somebody else walks out. Why is that happening, right? Or every time the whole crew walks in the room, somebody else disappears. Those are all SA things that we can gather and help take this, you know, command philosophy and a way to recognize the situation and start working down, you know, some of those other, maybe that HR incident alignment, right? Sean, would you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing one of my mentors told me, and he said this statement, it blew me away. We don't all watch the same news the same. And if you think about that, especially when there's polarizing things in society, and you start about from a command office perspective, if you go in a room and there's always Fox News on, if you go in a room there's always CNN News, it's taking that, how much situational awareness is going on in where I'm at to where it's comfortable for me, but could potentially be uncomfortable for someone else. And I call it flexibility fatigue, personally, because when we come to the stations, what would be normal flexibility for somebody, we don't really have it. My chair, my bed, my this, my that. But when the bells go off, we're extremely flexible. We'll deal with anything from this to that. But as soon as we come back to where we live, reside, play, and work, I'm not that flexible. And so having the awareness that we as humans go through this and why we do it and how somebody may come in and how it may affect our service delivery, it's all a part of that just ongoing continual situational awareness that when we come to work different than the employees that we are at work, but that affects the work we do. So
that's a good point. Overarching. I mean, there's a lot of different factors in that. So good discussion. Thank you. Okay. Let's move down to determining incident complexity and delve into that one a little bit. Chief Russell, you want to talk about what factors increase or decrease complexity?
Okay, sure. So the first thing, we'll just start off, well, what is complexity? What does that mean to you? Anybody?
How big or small the incident is?
Okay. What if we, what's that?
Unknowns.
Unknowns. What if we change the word complexity to complicated? How complicated is the incident? What are complications that you may see in front of you? What are some pitfalls? So the inspectors, what are some complications that you face with inspections?
Having to determine what set of codes apply and which ones, if that involves any kind of politically sensitive where the jurisdictions lie, if there's a past history where we've done inspections before out there and maybe something was allowed prior but now isn't, there's unpermitted construction, different factors like that.
So you have some inspections you go into, this one's gonna be easy, and others you're kind of dreading actually taking on because the complications involved.
Is it the spirit of the code or the letter of the code, right? There's a complexity. So, sorry.
So what's,
Seems like complexity is the intersection of differing perspectives or goals or, ways of action. So you have this intersection of those influences, and that has to be resolved. They make a simple problem difficult, so, because there's different ways to go. And many of them are legitimate, and some of them are not legitimate or illegal to do or immoral to do. And so you have to weave your way through those and sort out the things that negatively impact the decision and those that positively impact the decision so you can move forward. So.
okay. So can two people look at the same situation and it's a different complexity level to each person? Does experience affect complexity? So a one-bedroom fire may look super complex to a probationary firefighter day one out of the academy versus a 10-year captain who's going, oh, this is nothing. Okay, what are some things that decrease our complexities?
Experience, like you said.
Okay.
Having a way to break it down that may make it simpler, like we have in command philosophy.
Okay,
Something
do you,
that breaks that down, okay, let me break this in a simpler way, and now I'm able to take the steps needed to get to the end result that I need.
okay. So everyday calls we go on, do you consciously determine how complex a call is, or do you just adapt?
That's why you rise to your training, right? You don't fall back, or you fall
Okay,
back to your training.
so take a medical aid. Do we do a complexity analysis as we walk into a medical aid, or are we doing that subconsciously?
Subconsciously.
Okay, what are some things that affect medical aids that make them more complex?
Dogs just have that.
Okay, dogs, size of the patient, location of the patient, access, all things like that. So you can sit there and go, okay, so I'm going to tie this back to Wildland now since I'm doing that one in March. So come and visit. So it may be part of the upcoming promotional exams. So you'll probably want to get some of the tidbits we'll be providing.
The promotional exams have not been established yet, just so we're clear. My lens looks like complexity of liability.
So does a roadside grass fire hold a high complexity or low complexity for most people? What are most roadside grass fire arrival reports?
Roadside
grass fire engine 555.
Going nowhere. Surrounded by concrete.
Yeah. Release the balance, cancel the tack, or cancel the balance, release the tack, right? And then you could sit here, you're not even on scene yet, you're being dispatched to a fire on the east side of Grant Line in the middle of July during a north wind day. That fire is complex before you even get on scene, because now you're running with allied agencies, we're running on a VHF radio plan, we're running into the SRA, there's multiple units, you have weather, you have time of year, you have fuel conditions, and that's before you're even on scene. So complexity can vary greatly. Now, does complexity change during an incident?
Yeah.
Or is it a constant? Okay, once we stabilize an incident, does the complexity decrease? Okay, so we start off on a structure fire and a life priority. Is that a high complex incident? Possibly. If we have a confirmed rescue, did our complexity just go up?
Yeah.
We complete that rescue, did our complexity just go down? So it's a kind of a cyclical thing. We kind of, and the complexity level varies on people's experience and the situation in front of us.
So Grant, can I chime in?
Absolutely.
You brought in a complex which brings up a good point, talking about you did a good job on the radios, the allied agencies, the CAL FIRE, the plan, and all that stuff. What I would throw back to you is coming in, looking at it from a captain and battalion chief's things. What are things you can do prior to the call? That's that SA, to have an alignment, right, before the call so you can handle and address those issues. Because if it's a red flag day and there's the wind and you're not prepared and your crew and you don't know where your radios are and your batteries are dead or you don't know the comm plan or SRA, what's that? Those are things that you could go be very overloaded and you're setting yourself up for failure and the stress, I wouldn't want to have that. But I would say that's that good essay. Now, what can you do to say, hey, we're not prepared today. What I need to do? Where's the CAL FIRE plan? Where's it at? Come to the training. Those are the things of getting ahead of it to develop a plan of action to prepare yourself for that day. Because even when Grant was saying that, I kind of felt stress, or good stress in my thing that was kicking in of going, how am I going to handle and address this? Okay, I got that. What about this? And little things I can work on. And those can be key things like, I'm going to jump back in my battalion 14 hat, is I would say as a battalion chief, I'd go, you know what, company officers, I want you guys to go up to Camino on a field trip. Can we do that? Yeah. Take some scheduling, but how much value would you get by you with your company driving up to Camino to do a tour of Camino and understand that dispatch system, and then you go to a cooperators meeting that we have here annually with all the allied agencies, including CAL FIRE, which includes Nevada, Yuba, Placer, when you're working B5 doing mutual aid, not SRA, LRA. Do you guys get where I'm going? So this is that building that system of complexity so you can better adapt and handle it. So anyways.
I think that's a good segue into risk assessments.
Well played. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Let's talk about risk assessment. Chief Peck, what does risk assessment mean in your wheelhouse?
So yeah, we're going to bring it back to conflict resolution, or HR issues. I really don't like calling them HR issues, conflict resolution. Anybody tell me what risk assessment means? Just generally. What does risk assessment mean?
You guys all wrote it down, right?
Assessing the consequences of each action or non-action and the benefits.
Sounds good.
Did you go on Google, Rashawn?
Anybody else?
You have to define what is risk first.
Define what's a risk first?
What is risk?
Okay.
What is someone's personal identification of their definition of risk? Like, if I see risk as a person's face, my fireman sitting next to me when we're going in, that's what I see as risk.
And that's going to go all the way back to what?
That's going to go all the way back to, well,
to essay, right?
Get in my essay.
That essay. Remember, that essay isn't just what you're seeing today. That's essay, years and years of slides and experience, right? So evaluating potential risks, right? So when we deal with conflict, are there any risks involved with dealing with conflict? Yeah? From the very beginning to the very end. Can someone give me an example of risk associated with dealing with conflict or conflict resolution?
Lawsuits.
Lawsuits? Okay. So as a supervisor, you can open yourself to liability, or even the agency to liability, right? If you don't recognize certain things, if the Firefighter Bill of Rights are being violated, Civil Rights Act being violated, sexual harassment, workplace discrimination, workplace violence, if you don't recognize that, or you don't act, or you act improperly, so liability, there's no doubt about that. What else? What other risks?
Morale. You could totally disrupt morale and culture for a very, very long time.
Okay, so we're back to the human factor. Okay, so that's true. If we don't deal with it effectively enough, what happens? The behavior doesn't change. The behavior becomes infectious. The behavior affects the culture. Or if you do it ineffectively and you rush to judgment and you don't get both sides of the stories, you can damage those professional relationships. And when you do that, it makes it even tougher to deal with those conflicts. Or you could just lose respect as a leader, as a supervisor. And when that happens, that affects the whole operation, right? Not just in the station, but on the fire ground. And this just isn't supervisor to subordinate. This is peer-to-peer. So when we talked about conflict resolution, this is peer-to-peer, not just involving supervisors. There's examples also of not knowing when to get your supervisor, maybe labor involved. And now you take a benign issue that is now snowballed into a bigger issue. Or maybe you might have jeopardized a future potential investigation because you weren't aware of the lines that you're maybe crossing. So there's all kinds of risks. When we get together in January, we're going to talk more about what the risks are, how to identify those risks, and how to avoid those risks. Anybody else have any examples of potential risks? Chief?
Yeah, Chief, I think it's important to realize that risk is neither negative or positive. A risk is a risk, and you just pointed out, If I intervene early, that's an opportunity of risk. I'm going to take a risk now to intervene early to quench this thing right now and satisfy it and move on. And the negative part of that is if I put it off and put it off and put it off because I'm afraid of the negative aspect of risk, then it can get worse. It'll simmer, percolate, something bad's going to happen eventually, you know. But there's two sides to risk. Just like in finances, there's two sides to risk. If you're in the stock market today, risk not so good. You know, you might want to put it in something else. But stock market also has positive risk too. So, just a thought.
I think Sun Tzu said it too. Danger, opportunity in the art of war. He describes in the book danger, opportunity. What is danger on one end is an opportunity on the other.
So that's a great point because unfortunately every conflict is different. We don't have a policy to cover every conflict. We don't have a defined flow chart. When we had the incident alignment up there for an HR issue, a personnel issue, we talked about immediate delayed. There's some conflicts where something needs to happen immediately. And I can't go to a policy. I can't figure out exactly what the right thing is maybe within a few minutes or maybe within 10, 15 minutes. So there's times where you might have to take a risk in terms of making sure you're providing for the safety of the firefighters, the citizens, whatever it might be. So what it really comes down to is really being a student of conflict resolution and coming to this PDP, coming to January's, talking with others, sharing with others. We're trying to, you know, as an agency, talk more about personnel issues. Like I said before, there's a lot of things we can't talk about. We can't apply names to it. But we can water it down enough to give you enough knowledge and confidence where I might have to take a risk right now immediately. I might not be able to wait and see. So that's a good point, Chief.
I think also mitigating that risk. Those are some of those one thing that popped in my head, I was had a fire up in the northern part of the state, and we were putting crews downhill on a fire that had jumped over the ridgeline, dozer line, and guys are going into the green chasing after fire. And I had a captain very upset with that and did not feel comfortable and all that. So we had the conversation. He was concerned about going into the green chasing a spot fire with another fire coming uphill below him. So we talked about the risk, and he talked about the shout watch outs and all that. So it's a conflict. How do you deal with it? So we talked about how can we mitigate that risk? Well, part of it was we have lookouts, right? And he says, you know, that was a little bit concerning. So when you're dealing with people who's a little bit stressed, he said, we do? I go, yeah, we do. We got 5 of them. And I go, we're talking to them on the radio, but you would put people in certain locations to watch the main fire, to watch the spot fires. So that's to mitigate that risk so you can engage. The other part was to have a plan that if the fire did this, we do that. That means we walk out. And we had a plan in play that we would know by the lookouts that if the fire did this, let us know because we need 30 minutes to hike out. And then once we had that mitigated those risks, we were able to go back and engage. Does that make sense? So I think mitigation's a big one to help limit some of those risks that you have.
But I will say, like Captain DePertis said, in these instances, I've had them where I didn't have that policy, but I could default back to the Metro Way. I could default back to the core values and know that I was going to be supported because of those values. So that is something that's going to definitely help you in those times where you do have to make an immediate decision and you don't have all the information or all the answers. Any other questions on risk? Like I said, we'll talk more about that in January. We'll go in depth a little bit more.
Ask the inspectors over here. So risk for you guys, right? A lot of things that you guys go out and inspect or to one form of mitigation of some risks, right? How does from your guys' lens, how does this look for risk assessment on not necessarily dealing with citizens or business owners, but just when it comes to enforcing codes and things like that? And why do we have those? Do those help with us with our risks? Do they what role does that play in our system to mitigate risk?
So are you meaning like on like our mandated inspections, so like ones that have more of like a life kind of priority,
Yeah.
so like an assembly or a large assembly or schools, our 2.1s are residential care facilities for elderly, those are definitely higher risk, apartment or even our apartments because people are living in them. So when we're going up to them, we're seeing like what systems do they have to protect in there? How does their exiting work? older construction versus newer construction, so how do those factors all play into how that building would react if there was an incident? So, and we mitigate them with our codes to then try to make the best of what we have for when you guys are all responding or when they're trying to get out of the building too.
Do you ever have problems getting the business owners or the decision makers of that company or whatever it is to comply or understand where you're coming from on these risks? And how do you address that with them? Because, you know, for us, we sort of get it, right? We understand that we want to have certain building features in place to allow for escape routes and things like that. But I'm sure you guys have problems trying to get those enforced and things like that. So how do you convey that risk to maybe a citizen or a business owner?
I think, you know, we are in this position only for a few weeks now, and I think that the problem that we've had to ask ourselves was, you know, should we educate or should we enforce? And the conflict of that sometimes is what already exists, like the existing non-conforming construction that was approved once upon a time, and now there have been more research that show that certain things are safer, but we can't enforce those things because it has already been established. So in that opportunity, I think ours would be to educate why it would be beneficial to switch out certain hardware or things like that, so it's safer for crews that respond and safer for their operation function.
Great job.
In CRD, when you talk about risk assessment, do you ever include your personal safety on some of the places you go? So there's a really good example right there. I think that would be probably a concern for you depending on where you go, or repeat offenders, or people who are frustrated because it's going to cost them more money or whatnot. So.
Yeah, I think driving the site, we always say that, especially for a lot of our apartment complexes, always drive the site first before you get out. There are some other spaces there we know where like the building owners are armed or aren't happy to have us there, so then that's someplace we'd bring an investigator with us. We wouldn't go in by ourselves. Knowing group inspections, or we'll make notes about occupants, past history like that.
Good relation, thank you. Good conversation.
I think all this kind of goes into, I know Captain Pittman and I took a class with Chief Mike Bryant from LA, who runs Elite Command, and it goes into what Chief Jenkins was saying, like when you think of risk, there's three portions of it. You can think of it like an equation. It's the threat, what can actually hurt you, right? Be it a personnel thing that is going to hurt the district or something like that, times the consequence, how big is this risk, right? Because that's what we haven't talked about, is there are some risks that, okay, I'm willing to take that risk because my consequence is low, versus some risks that I'm not going to take because my consequence is high. And then like what Chief Jenkins said, times the mitigation, right? So when you put that together, maybe right now, the way it stands, our consequence is high, but we can put some mitigations into place that's going to now make this risk a tolerable risk because I put mitigations in place. So it's an equation, and things change in it based on your situational awareness, your complexity, your decision points, and all that.
Great point. And so part of it says, you know, perform a risk assessment, but it really is you're assessing risk. What is our tolerance for the risk, and what are the mitigations? So like Captain Pittman, for your special operations side of the house, what are those mitigations you put in place to deal with some of those things?
So we have control measures put in place to reduce risks on the boat. For example, every day we look at an app to see what the water temp is, what the flows are. If the flows are too high, we can change out our PFDs to a high flow vest that give us more flotation. If we have too cold of water temps, we can change out from shorts and a t-shirt with a life vest to a wetsuit to a dry suit to mitigate those risks of hypothermia. On active water rescues, we have two boats. The downstream protection boat reduces mitigation risk. By having that downstream protection, we can have a helicopter overhead. So in April, we're going to go further into the special operations, hazmat, MCIs, and water rescues, and the mitigations that we put in place to reduce those risks. Structure fires, you guys do it daily. On a 2-story house fire, DePertis, what do we do for mitigating risks on a 2nd-story house fire?
Put a line inside to protect the stairwell for people going upstairs, and check the 1st story before you go upstairs.
There you go. Andy Field on vehicle accidents on the freeway. How do we reduce risk?
We use our engine or truck to protect our working area. We request law enforcement to help control traffic. Appropriate PPE, making sure our lights on.
There we go. You guys do it daily without even thinking about it.
Good, thank you. So back to the shameless plug. If you're interested in more performing risk assessment, meaning page 21 through 29 in the command manual, it talks more about it. And this is another one we could do a full class on.
One thing that helps is that the USFA sends out emails every time there's a fatality. And I would caution. It can be shocking to get one like every other week, but for me it helps with that situational awareness of stuff that we take for granted that is happening throughout the country, but we all go, oh, it won't happen to me. Something as simple as 29-year-old gets out, gets hit by a vehicle. So I do that just to keep me like in that mode, like this actually does happen. Because we get comfortable after 1,000 calls going, it doesn't happen. But it's happening around the country. So that's one thing that I do, just it comes out, we're at like 92 right now, or 90 deaths. But it just keeps you aware, like this does happen. This is inherent risk to what we do, and you gotta be situational about it.
It can bite you at any time. As you mentioned that, there was one the other day where they were doing a training and somebody slipped on ice and hit their head, and now they're not gonna make it, right? Training at work. Didn't even see that one because they'd done it 1,000 times, as the chief said, so.
Also due to risk, I think it was great having you guys in here. And that was the Ghost Ship in Oakland, if you guys are familiar with that. So a building that hadn't been inspected for years, and they built all the different things, and then a fire happens in it, you have mass fatalities. And you look at not only the risk and what happened, but then you look at the effects to the fire agency and the community and everything else. And I think the fire chief was fired or quit, and the fire marshal and everything else, because there was that risk, but it wasn't even addressed. And when you take all the legal laws and all that, kind of looking at a broader picture, when you come in to do that inspection, and we deal with it all the time, it's like, well, do I completely enforce it? Or do I educate? Are they gonna follow it? What happens if something happens, and the legalities? And those are all those risk assessments that you take all the time in the decision process. You mentioned liability, it's a pretty big step, all the different things that we do, but it's comes down to just even walking into a building, and then we deal with an event. What ifs?
Mm-hmm. And that's, you mentioned mandates. There's mandated inspections because of some of those things that happen, right? So that's how we're mitigating the risk.
Chief, last thing on risk. If we did have a PDP on this a while back, and it was videoed, and if you want to find it, go to our YouTube channel, Metro Fire Training YouTube channel that Captain Cahill organizes. In the playlist, there's a PDP playlist, and it's in there. So that one's really operational based, but it was a great conversation by people in all ranks in our organization at the time, having a discussion on risk, and take a peek at it, refresher. It's about an hour long.
Great content there. There's a lot of intelligent people that are talking about risk for an hour plus.
It was April.
Not a shameless all right, let's move on to the next one so we keep moving down here to stay at that tip of the iceberg level. Let's talk about some decision points. Chief Johnson, as it relates to your area of presentation, what are our decision points?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys heard, but in February we're talking about fires. It's going to be great. You guys should come. So talking about decision points, there's a couple different ways to look at this, I think, from a task or tactical level up to a strategic level of the decision points as they're defined in here. So the example would be if you're a third due engine company that's assigned to fire attack as a secondary hose line, you're going to subconsciously go through this, right? What is the fire? What is the building? What's happening right now? What's the complexity? What kind of risk are we taking? And then you will make the decision, say, hey, we're going to stretch the engine 3/4 off the rear to go support fire attack on the second floor, right? That was your decision point. Basically, if you're stopped in the moment of doing that and somebody says, why are you doing what you're doing? You should be able to have some way to articulate that you went through some sort of a thought process to do that task. Not because, well, this is what we did last time, or this is what I thought was best, or I like the color blue, so I picked that one, right? So you're going through that thought process. But what you need to know at the same time, at the strategical level, is the decision points are kind of like trigger points for the incident commander. So we have, and whoever's sitting in the seat of command, it could be a captain right now, if a B-13 fire happens, there's going to be a captain in command for a long time, right? Because I'm way down here. But it's the trigger points. It's the if-then scenarios, right? It's the plan B. So knowing that while all the engine companies and truck companies are doing their work and coming up with decisions to mitigate the problem, there's somebody that's at a higher level that should be doing that for the totality of the incident and ready to make strategical shifts based on that information. Two-tiered, task level, strategic level. Question?
So what's a decision point that most of you captains are making on a daily basis right now?
There's a lot of them.
But
some of the
just about every call you go on, do I need a medic? You know, that's a decision point on EMS calls. It's a single engine response you're making daily. You know, at what point in the incident do you make that? Do you make, you know, how far on scene are you there? At what point do you make that decision to order a medic? It's a daily decision point.
So there's a captain lens there, or even just a company level firefighter engineer also that's looked through. But from my lens, as the ops chief, there were things that were occurring as far as situational awareness, and we have this little thing called drawdown, and this other little thing called wall time. And we got to a point where we were regularly seeing those things happen, and we know the long-term plan for dealing with that just takes too long to mitigate all of the problems to get to where we get a good resolution. So from my perspective, and working with the regional partners, we had to make some critical decisions when we started to get to ambulance level 0 in the county. To try to avoid that, we were forced into, what do we need to do right now to be able to mitigate this? And that was really one of the decision points from my lens. So you're deciding whether to add a medic or not. I'm deciding whether we even send a medic on a call, because we have this whole system drawdown that we need to address having a medic available to deal with a high acuity call. And how do we do that in the current environment and umbrella, knowing that there's other things that we need to work on to do a better job. Add ambulances, deal with the hospitals and get them out of there at a certain amount of time, get them off the wall, all of those things, but they all take time. So it's important, the decision points, when we talk about levels in the organization. You mentioned strategic or task level. Each area of the organization or level of responsibility also has a different lens for what those decision points look like. On the other end of it, are there calls that are Alpha, Bravo, Omega calls that result in high transport percentages that currently you're not getting an ambulance on? Absolutely. Decision point. If we're transporting most of the time on a call and we're not sending an ambulance on it, is that the most effective usage of our time of our first responders maybe sitting on scene a little longer waiting for an ambulance? Probably not. So now we're looking at, okay, what are those high percentage call types that we're having multiple long wait times to get that ambulance there? Because when we talk about service delivery, if somebody's going to go to the hospital, we're going to take them to the hospital. And to do that faster is better service delivery. So we got to look at that too. And so the decision point now is, okay, we're at a point where we know that data. We're looking at how are we going to change and adapt to make it better so that when you're hitting these certain call types, you're getting an ambulance on those calls. Or maybe there's a BLS ambulance involved. So that's just a little bit more perspective on lenses and where you're at in the organization and how those things happen.
Chief Peck's point about the human factors involved, it even goes down to the situation awareness that as company officers now, we have to deal with a scenario that Chief Jenkins and Chief Happy never had to deal with in regards to, do we educate the patients on, is this appropriate? Do you need a medic? There are wall times now. What are your expectations? Because you may be sitting there 6 to 12 hours. So now we got to bridge this human factor of, how do I engage, and just, is it policy or is it education? Just give me a medic, we'll take you, you need to go. Or is it the human factor of, man, what's your expectation? Well, that's not going to happen today. It's just really not. And I mean, you could honestly probably get there faster in your own car than it is in explaining the educational piece of the system drawdown and all those things, which is a situational awareness thing. And then supported by the command philosophy. Will I be supported from telling my medic, hey, look, you can have this conversation with this patient, and it's not a paramedic initiated refusal. It's actually, we're informing them, giving them overall guidance of how the system works. So,
is there a risk associated with that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting, very great points.
Yeah, that's awesome.
When Chief Mitchell was bringing up the lens on decision on a medic, and then he's talking about the changes in the hospitals, I'm going back to when Chief Russell's running a fire and I meet him, I got 18 mobile homes on fire, a fatality, all this stuff, it's spotting a quarter mile away, and I get the phone call, you're down to 0 medics in the county. You know, and everything we're talking about, is that complex? Yeah.
And who's calling you?
What? Yeah, it's like, well, you know, dispatch the county with there's 0 medics, right? And so we bring these things up to help where Rashawn's bringing up on educating, is to bring a little bit more of that perspective, not only Chief Mitchell, maybe from my wheelhouse, maybe Chief Russell. He's not, he just wants, I need fire engines. And then do I activate ISRMs? You know, I can't activate ISRMs, I have no fire engines. And so all these different things complex, but then coming back to how do we mitigate, it's by, in Chief Mitchell's wheelhouse and Chief Harm's wheelhouse, is they're dealing with the politics and the hospitals and the decision process and the drawdown and having a procedure that now you see the cause and effect where you guys are having to make the decision in the field of, do I get a medic or do I not get a medic, right? But we have to have, that's some of that complex issue.
Yep.
And going to Captain Folger's way that he was explaining it, as a firefighter side of mitigating that risk of how are you ending that conversation with education. We're still happy to take you to the hospital if that's what you'd like to do today, but we're letting you know all your vital signs are within normal limits. You may be sitting there for hours, and due to the process now, you possibly could be released or you possibly not. Now that you know all the information, what would you like to do? That mitigates the risk for us as legality, as the paramedic initiated, and it puts the ball back into their court, so you're not taking anything away from making that transport.
Yep, great point. And this allows for that, so good discussion.
By that, what are some risks by you doing that? Just, what are some risks by you saying that or mentioning that to the public?
As far as?
Just
the way they perceive it.
Correct. Perception. So what I would get to is where we deal with stuff is we get the complaint that you guys refuse to transport them. You get where I'm going? So I liked how you articulated it and you went through, but you have to remember when you throw those things out there, there's some risk that how it may be perceived, good point, of they refuse to take me when that wasn't your intentions. So what are the words that you use and how do you present that? And when we go, we want to, you get where I'm going. That's a risk, right?
I always tell folks that work with me, just say you're managing expectations. You call me to assist you. One of the ways I can assist you is I have outside intimate knowledge of what's going on in the hospitals. That's why you call me. I would love for you to have that knowledge and use that knowledge to help you make a decision. So help me help you manage your expectations. If you think based on where you are right now in the system, you're going to get seen right now, I'm going to inform you. We would love to take you, but your expectation is not going to be met. And that keeps the safety for you, and I'm going to take it. And then what it does is it educates the next generation. Because grandma don't want to go and sit there for 6 hours when she thinks, hey, I'm going to be seen real quick. And then the family gets, where you been, grandma? I was at the hospital. Well, you should have listened to him then, right? He told you it was going to be 12 hours. And it really does the job we haven't been doing well in a global way. By just saying, hey, this is what we know. I'm sharing it with you. If you want to go under these pretenses, we're more than happy to do what you call us to do.
A whole nother multiple hour, probably day discussion on that just in and of itself. And it is frustrating. I will say before we leave that though, understanding that it is very difficult out there right now. There are a lot of issues. It's important for you to know that you are all doing a damn good job being resilient and dealing with this situation. That happens daily. We had even this morning, we started to get the drawdown. So thank you for doing that. We are working on it, and you doing what you're doing right now to help support each other is phenomenal. So keep up that work. It will take some time. I'm not going to BS you. It's going to take us quite a long time to get the legislative changes we need to deal with just that side of the EMS house. But in the meantime, we are working on some other stuff as well. So we do need to follow protocol and those types of things, because I don't ever want to put you in a position where you have your licensure challenged outside of a process that we can control. If it gets to the LEMSA or EMSA level, there's no control that we have. So we need to be aware of that too. I never want to put you in that position. So good conversation. Thank you. I digress.
Chief, real quick before we move on.
Yeah.
I'm having trouble comprehending this. I'm reading define decision point, but a lot of what I'm hearing is make a decision. Is that what it is, or am I not grasping the concept on this right now? Because like the example you gave, Chief, is we're going to a call, we don't have a medic yet, Are we ordering a medic now, or are we waiting to order a medic? That to me is, okay, we have our situational awareness, we've gone through the incident, and now we're making a decision. So is that what defined decision point is, or is it something different?
No, so when you look at the top of this, it says Metro Fire expectations for incident commanders. So remember, when this was originally authored and written, it was for that. It has morphed to a really good decision-making framework that is universal for a lot of different things throughout the agency. So what you're referencing at that task level, essentially, is you're making a decision. From a command perspective, at the strategic level, the decision points are the if-then scenarios. If the fire reaches this ridge, then we're going to do this, right? So I have plans in the background that are going along. But that is a decision that's being made. Make sense?
It's the contingency pieces.
So kind of go back to your medic. So you get in there, at what point in your patient contact do you determine you're transporting that patient, you need a medic? That's your decision point. So you've reached a certain point that you go, okay, this is a confirmed transport, then you're going to order that medic. So you know it's not. So you go in and if you go in and you got someone that's got a stubbed toe, you don't necessarily realize that's going to be a confirmed transport. So you might take longer to decide how you're going to resolve that. But you walk in and someone's turning blue, you're going to sit here and go, oh, we need a medic. That would be your decision point.
I think it's an if and then.
It's an
if this happens, you do this. So for me, as a new battalion chief, I was on a fire and we were chasing spot fires out on a large incident, and we probably had about 8 of them. I did not have a decision point. We call them trigger points. I did not have a decision point, and I learned it. And what happened was I had a line we're trying to hold. It was jumping the line. We're chasing them. Cal Fire's coming in, they're putting fire on the ground. We're losing the whole line, and we put ourselves in a situation that now everybody run, get out of Dodge when the division finally says, get out of there, right? And then we're running from fire. It was pretty tenacious, and it ended up exploding like 30,000 acres over probably another 12 hours. It was insane. But with what happened, what I learned from that is I needed to establish some trigger points and talk about all that thought process at the end of my mind. So what I'm getting back to, if I went on a call with you before and we're in the same situation, I would now come up and say, and it could change, I have to be flexible, is if I made it very clear to everybody that, hey, we're gonna go after 3 spot fires. After the 4th one, we've lost the line, we're getting back in our rigs, we're getting out of here. Because that's a decision point or a trigger point. Very clear, and that should be very clear expectation, a decision point. So getting back to your medic call, you're gonna go where a medic's not on the call. You need to have a decision point of when a medic gets engaged or you validate we don't need a medic. That's the decision point. You kind of already setting them, but I would say with that experience and the calls that you go on, if you are going down and you're listening to the call and there's no medic and you have a multi-vehicle accident with multiple patients, your decision point is, I need 1 medic, heck, I need 3 medics, right? You're gonna have a decision point that you need to make. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, and so does the decision points and trigger points, is that kind of interchangeable? Because the way that was described makes more sense.
So to give a little bit of an example, trigger point was the key term. I heard it changed to decision point. We were down in Montecito, Carpenterland, Santa Barbara on a fire. And Schwarzenegger was the governor, and we had the Zaka fire that was, they called them sundowners, but it was dropping embers into the town of Santa Barbara, right? And we started using trigger points. Talk about the community freaking out when you start talking trigger points. If the fire does this, our trigger point is, what? So we had to change trigger because it really freaked people out to a decision point. It's kind of the same thing, but when we talk about a fire coming down the hill, our thing was we're going to watch the fire, it's coming down the hill. At this point, when it hits this point, we're ring firing these houses with fire. And once it gets here, then we're out of Dodge. That's the last ditch effort I'm going to do on those homes before we walk away, because we're going to try to protect the homes. But if the fire's going to hit a point where our safety's compromised, I've set that trigger point or that decision point into play. If the fire does this, and you heard Mike say it, the fire does this, we do that. You're doing it all the time. I'm going to punch this hose line through the front door. When we get good knockdown, now I'm going to start heading up to the upstairs, right? But you're not going to head upstairs until you get the fire down below, right? You're kind of consciously doing it. But those are if it does this, I do this. So that's a good conversation to have, especially after calls, If something didn't happen, talk about it and then reflect. Like I told you, I'm sharing you that you should now have some, if you're going on a fire and you start having spot fires, start asking your question, what happens if I get another one? What happens if I get another one? I'm just gonna keep chasing them? Because there comes a point that things get compromised, and I got caught in that, right? We're chasing 8 of them until it was hell in a handbasket, and then we're putting ourselves in a position to bail out of here and people's safety's compromised. So things to think about.
All right, staying at the iceberg level. A lot of these conversations will happen. I appreciate this great conversation. I just want to make sure we keep moving forward and get through the information, understanding we'll get into more of it, but these are great discussions to have. Moving out of here too. So let's go on to management and control objectives. And I know this is another one you all wrote down. So talking about that for Chief Russell, what does that mean and what's the difference?
So when you hear the term management objectives, what do you think of? What's a management objective?
How'd you write them down?
Getting the right people in the right spots.
Okay.
A strategic approach to enhance performance of an organization, set by goals, listed by management, and conveyed to its members.
Now that's dictionary.
That sounds like Webster's.
Nice job.
Yeah. So a management objective, so everybody here has read an IAP. The first box on a 202 lists your incident management objectives. What's always the first management objective listed in every IAP on any incident? Provide for public and first responder safety. Okay? Management objectives are an overarching thing, and most of the time your management objectives don't change. They stay consistent. So up on this board right here, the Metro Way, is that a management objective for Metro Fire? Okay. What's a control objective? If a management objective is overarching and kind of the big umbrella, what's a control objective?
How you use it?
Okay. It's specific. Okay, so to quote Chief Jenkins, it's the box. We build the box. So control objective, contain the fire to the room of origin, contain the fire to the building of origin. MCI on the freeway, triage, treat, and transport. Those are control objectives. Okay, control objectives for CRRD would be to complete the inspection and resolve any violations. Management objective would again be provide for safety of CRRD personnel and the public.
So we talk about value-based decision-making and how that applies to this process. When we talk about specifically management and control objectives, we have the mission, vision, and values of Metro Fire. We have the Metro Way. Management objectives. Those are management objectives. Those are how we do business. That's our culture. This is what we expect. Service delivery is number one. This is how we do things, generally speaking. Chief Russell just applied those to deal with an MCI, a fire, and an inspection with control objectives. So those are what your decisions are being made for. Those are how you're going to impact whatever the specific situation is that you're talking about when you're talking about this. Now on management objective side, there's our mission, vision, values, and pillars of the Metro Way available. Are there management objectives that are more stringent for us when it pertains to the jobs we do than having mission, vision, values, and pillars of the Metro Way? Answer is yes. There's laws, there's policies, there's protocols, there's those types of things out there that are also management objectives. They're telling you if you are dealing with this, this is the expectation. How you control that MI that you're dealing with is up to you to base that off the protocol that's telling you exactly what to do. Service delivery is in part of that as well. Okay? Management objectives, typically unchanged, very high level. They stay the same throughout whatever we do day in and day out. Control objectives, those are the ones that change depending on the decision you're dealing with. Okay? So that's a big question that comes up often. Any other questions on that? Guess what? It's in here. It talks a lot about it. Page 31 through 33. Okay? Let's keep moving. Let's talk about moving now down to, we're in the action phase now of our decision process. The first four, we just established this. What are we going to do to deal with whatever it is that we've sized up? And let's talk more about the request, ensure appropriate resources are requested to meet your objectives and that they're assigned the appropriate tactics. Captain Pittman, you want to spend some time on that one when it relates to your area?
Yeah, resources available to water rescues, thinking outside the box. Allied agencies, we utilize state parks, both their rangers and their lifeguards on calls depending on where on the river it is. We've used the lifeguards at Lake Natoma to go subsurface. They're trained to go a lot deeper than we are. They have different protocols and procedures to follow than what we have for subsurface. We've utilized the Sheriff's Department for searching underwater. They have a submarine drone that last year they found 2 victims in the river for us. We also have obviously our helicopter, our drone program, our UAVs. The Sheriff's Department has their own UAVs if ours aren't available. So in April, we're going to go further into the resources available on river rescue calls as far as utilizing Fish and Wildlife and Coast Guard for hazmats that are in the river.
So the resources one, again, we typically go to fire engines, fire trucks, ambulances, hazmats, boats, those types of things. But it's really important to recognize, again, and we need to do a better job of this, is when we're dealing with whatever incident it is, if it's a personnel issue, then the resources are probably your chain of command. There's the Human Resources Division that deal with those things, and they're there to help you in your time of need. So it can be adaptable to whatever it is you're dealing with. What are those resources you need? Maybe there's not a whole lot. Maybe it's just you and you handle it at that lowest level, right? So that's what that's talking about on the bottom end of this.
We mentioned in yesterday's class resources for like mental health, which is big right now, and peer support. We had Captain and Freddie here yesterday. And I know at the firehouse level, I've utilized peer support on multiple calls. And so that's
great point.
A bigger resource becoming more available for us that we haven't used much in the past, that hopefully is becoming more of the norm after critical calls.
Great point. Those are, again, another non-emergency scene example that's available to the organization and decisions. So, the last part of this, and probably one of the most important, is, although like I started with, this is a very linear approach and bullet pointed, this is a cyclical decision process. And as we gain more information over time, we make this initial plan, we come up and we say, here's what we're going to do. We go back to the top, you get your 360 of whatever the incident is, and you get more information. This actually has to do with something illegal. Now we have to change my way of dealing with what I thought I was going to be able to deal at my level. My situational awareness got better, my complexity changed, what is my risk now, and I need to continue going down that process. So, Chief Russell, do you want to cover a little bit about the reevaluation and how it's happening?
Reevaluation, how often do we reevaluate on an incident? Okay, should be something you're constantly thinking of. Are you asking yourself, are what we're currently doing right now, are we making a difference? Okay, so are we chasing the incident still? Is it stabilizing? Are we behind the curve and we need more resources to help us with that incident? Okay, we've gotten ahead of the incident, now we have too many resources, and now you start making your plan to release your resources to kind of start downgrading your incident. So, medical aids, you're in the back of the medic. What are you doing the entire time all the way to the hospital? Reevaluating your patient. Okay, you're looking for changes. Are what we're doing making a difference? It should be one of those things that you're just constantly in the back of your mind thinking, is this plan working or do I need a new plan?
Good. I saw you walking around back there, Captain Gardner. Do we cover all the points that we have up here on what we started with about what we want to make sure we get out? Is there areas that we need to reinforce?
I was going to ask this group, this first one, different perspective on the command philosophy. Is it different than maybe when you came in or when we started the conversation? Group that wrote it up here. Anybody else have a different perspective on it now?
Was that more in regards to other agencies' command philosophy? Yeah. Or okay.
I don't know. I just
I think it was in relation to other.
I didn't get into that very much. Yeah.
Agencies' command philosophy. How does it differ from other agencies?
So, I will thank you for that. And I remember that being one of those different thought process. Anyway, it was over here, right? So we didn't talk a lot about when the history of this coming together, and that I mentioned the 65th Street back during that conversation of the history. The SROGs came out of very early on that 65th Street incident and how we got there. And there was very specific reasons as a region that we said, hey, we need to do better at this. And so got together and put those together. And through time, the SROGs have changed and been updated. Back early, it's been the last 6 years or so, we talked specifically about the command SROG. And intentionally, there was a lot of information that was taken out of the old version. We called it de-smoking it. It was very fire-based originally because it was adapting to exactly what it caused the SOGs to come about. And we made it more in alignment with a decision process that allows us to adapt to the situation rather than spelling out very specifically what you do and how you manage a fire. And so it reflects this. I was on the committee at the time along with some other folks, and it was intentional to this. So whether or not the other agencies call a command philosophy, they don't. They all have this. We gave it to them and we printed it, and I talked with them about it. I will say that in conversations they were like, wow, we've needed that for a long time, wish we were part of that. They are now. It's in the SROG. It's part of what we do, but in some of the Ross Corolla was here yesterday, works at B7, and obviously works a lot with B3 across the line, said, it's funny that when we talk about AARs, a lot of this terminology is coming up. So even though it's not like a thing that somebody could go into their pocket and pull out and say, yeah, this is how we do it, it is one of those things that is known amongst the region about how we do things. So hopefully that addresses the other agencies specifically and how they do business, but we've done a good job of approaching it from that regard on the regional level. They did, and rightly so, they just don't want it to say this on it, the logo, right? So, did that hit the rest? Is that good over here now? Or?
Yeah, I think so. The only other one that is, again, I think we danced around this one a little bit, define what verbiage is expected, quote unquote, life priority.
Is that more in the radio reports and arrival? Hey, look at this, it worked. February, we'll get into the weeds, and a lot of the feedback is, hey, we want to get into it a little bit. That's it. Thanks for identifying that. It worked, Katie, right on.
You'll see Katie in February.
Yeah, she'll be here, so, as well as everybody else. Okay. Good. I think we'll make sure that, please, if you have, it looks like you have them in front of you. The evaluation forms are there. Again, I really want to say thank you for your time. I'm very humbled. I feel very humbled that you're here and spending the time with us today. I appreciate that you got hopefully some value out of it, but have a good, safe rest of your shift, and we'll see you all out there.